afternoon and welcome to the January 21st, 2026 City Council work session. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials web page. Thank you again for joining us in this virtual meeting format today. I now call the January 21st, 2026 work session of the Eugene City Council to order, and I will turn it over to our city manager to introduce our first topic, which is a work session on the proposed wastewater expansion to serve Goshen, Short Mountain Landfill, and the city of Creswell.
Thank you, Mayor. In this first work session, as you said, we'll have Lane County staff here to present on that topic of proposal to expand Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission service area to include Goshen, Short Mountain Landfill, and Creswell, along with the discussion of potential impacts on the regional wastewater system capacity and costs, and next steps related to the Metro Plan. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Hurley, the Lane County Public Works Director, to begin the presentation, but I also wanted to note we have several staff also available for questions as needed, including Alyssa Hunter, our Planning Director, Michelle Miranda, our Wastewater Treatment Plant Division Manager, and we also have Matt Stouter, the MWMC General Manager, with us today. So Dan, I'll throw it to you.
All right, thank you, Matt. Let me go ahead and share my slides. Okay. All right, well, good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor and City Councilors. Appreciate you having us here today to talk about this issue of proposed regional wastewater expansion. I'm joined by friends from Creswell today, and our city manager from Creswell will take a couple slides here. But this is an update on where we're at in the process and to prepare you for the next steps, what we're seeing as a Metro Plan amendment. So the county is sponsoring an amendment that the council will get to weigh in on whether you want to support this idea or not. We last talked about this back in 2023, and many of you were at the presentation when we talked about that then. We also we started a Metro Plan amendment. We worked through a joint planning commission session, and the planning commissions, as well as the work sessions with the city councils, both in general supported the concept, but wanted more information around potential impacts to existing ratepayers, the cost of the project, and some capacity concerns. And so we've done additional work since then with some additional studies to get at those two issues of cost and capacity. And I'll share some of that in the presentation here. But we sort of put it on the shelf too. We didn't have funds identified at the county. There were lots of other high priority projects going on. And so this was kind of put on the back burner. But it's been lifted up again and with more urgency at this point, as there are two communities that are interested in connecting to this project and connecting into the MWMC, the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission system. And so that's the city of Creswell, and more recently, just in the last few months, the city of Junction City. So I think it's actually good timing that we kind of stalled out for a little while, because now we have the opportunity to look at this with some other partners and look at this as a region. So I have a set of slides here. I'm going to try to move through pretty quickly and keep this to about 15 minutes so that we have plenty of time for question and answer. All right. So let's see, my slide isn't advancing. Okay, there we go. So a little background, this project's been going on. We actually found a project, a report since the 60s that looked at connecting Goshen into the system. So this idea has been out there for a long time. But most recently, in 2011 was really when this gained momentum at the Lane County Board of Commissioners level. This is in the wake of the Great Recession, and the board was looking at ways to increase economic development within the region, and started looking at Goshen. And they set this goal by 2017, which we missed, but still working on the project, to transform Goshen with increased levels of development and to add well-paying jobs in the area. They were looking at adding about 2,000 to 3,000 potential jobs in the Goshen area. And so you're probably aware of Goshen, just south of Springfield, Eugene. And it's a unique area because it has a lot of industrial land, mostly contiguous, over 300 acres of industrial land, which is unique for our region and the state. It was actually identified by the state as a regionally significant industrial area, a designation that doesn't exist anymore, but it was important at the time. But it's unique also in that it's at this nexus of various transportation pathways of Highway 99, Highway 58, Interstate 5, there's the railroad. It has plenty of utilities aside from wastewater, with power, water, fiber optics, natural gas, close access to labor markets. But it hasn't really developed to its potential, largely because of land use barriers and then this issue around not having wastewater service. So on the land use side of things, the board started through a process to upzone this area from, it was rural industrial, and now it is Goshen-specific general industrial and light industrial. So these are urban levels of industrial development that are now allowed. We went through the process of obtaining a statewide planning exemption for Goal 14 around urbanization and developed what was called the GREAT Plan, the Goshen Regional Employment and Transition Plan, to assist in this transformation of Goshen. As we went through that process, it was appealed by Landwatch of Lane County, and the Land Use Board of Appeals required us to do some additional work to show how wastewater services would be supplied to this area. And so that led us to a 2015 study where we looked at different alternatives. One of them was connecting into the MWMC system. One was looking at lagoon treatment. Another one was a small, version of MWMC, a mechanical treatment plant. Ultimately recommending that the MWMC connection would be the best for a variety of reasons of cost, environmental effectiveness, and just it made sense regionally. So that's the direction that we've started heading with this project. As we looked at some preliminary designs and connecting into Goshen, realized it also made sense to try to connect in the Short Mountain landfill. If we're going as far to Goshen, it's just another about mile and a half to connect the landfill. And the landfill produces a significant amount of wastewater. We call it leachate that comes percolating through the landfill, and about 25 million gallons a year that has been trucked into the MWMC system with these tanker trucks. And so we've been doing that for decades now. And there's a significant environmental impact of that, of all these truck trips on the road. They also have to really ramp up the operation during significant wet weather events where we're running 3 trucks 24 hours a day. And the potential for these trucks to have accidents, and it's quite an operation that we would like to discontinue if we could have a pipeline connection there. That also led us to a financial study back in 2017. We were looking at a couple different ways that we could have the users pay their way into the system. There was this SDC, a system development charge model, and a buy-in model. It also recommended a number of administrative recommendations to help complete this project of which entities could provide which services, things around ownership and billing and things like that. Then we started into some engineering plans. 2022, we completed what was called the project definition report. So that looked at running 2 10-inch force mains along Highway 99 to connect into Goshen, and then a 6-inch line to connect to the landfill. So I think I'll stop here to talk about the connection from Creswell up to Goshen. Creswell has started facing a moratorium on housing with an action from DEQ, and I'll introduce Vincent Mortarello, City Manager at Creswell, to pick it up from here.
Hello, everyone. As Dan mentioned, we are currently under a mutual agreement order with DEQ. And that's a big way of saying that given the number of years, it's been a challenge for us to meet certain requirements given the flow of the stream and tributary that we discharge into. So DEQ we had entered a mutual agreement that really puts a moratorium on certain development within Crestwell. As we meet certain conditions or certain improvements, we do get a number of what's called equivalent dwelling unit connections. And several months ago, we received 10 because our staff has been doing a great job in meeting those conditions. But the reality for us is we're faced with really two options moving forward, either the regional connection, which we ask for your support for, or to build a improved plant here in Crestwell. The cost difference between those is the plant itself initially would be about $70 million, and that's not including the upgrades that we would need every several years or every 5 years to meet certain requirements. The regional connection initially was about $43 million. And in conversations with Lane County and just the timing of different finances, we've agreed to take on a little bit more expense, about $12 million, bringing the project up to $52 million so we can make this connection. And the connection that was really designed was for, as you see on the screen, our population out to 7,500. We're currently at just over 5,800. And the upgrades that would be needed to connect into this system. And there's more conversations that Dan will probably go into a little bit further about the additional information that needs to be reviewed and the amount of detail for the total impact on the system, and then how to bring that system up to being able to meet our connection with really minimal cost impact or no cost impact to the existing users. So in working with Lane County and DEQ, we're really all in agreement that the connection to the Metro regional system into Springfield and through Eugene is really our best option moving forward long term. And it also, there is a benefit to the Metro Wastewater Commission from expanding their user rate base, allowing them to expand that way a little bit for future revenue as well. And I think that might cover both slides, Dan.
That's great. Thanks, Vincent. And I'll just add that Crestwell is very challenged in running their facility, down in Crestwell. It's a very small water body that they discharge to, the Camuswell Creek. And wastewater treatment plants are, very expensive and difficult to run, especially with, increasing environmental regulations. To discharge to a small creek like that for a growing community is very challenging. More recently, just in the last couple months, we've been approached by Junction City, and they're under a very similar compliance action from DEQ and a moratorium on housing. So they're trying to catch up to where the city of Crestwell is right now in their studies, and they're actually farther along than we had thought. I don't have a slide on Junction City because we haven't actually gone back to our board yet. But that's the next step of this, is to go to the board to see if they're interested in initiating a Metro Plan amendment that would include Junction City. So I just do want to put that on your radar, that may develop as a potential ask as we're looking at this proposed Metro Plan amendment. Junction City is in a very similar situation too. They're discharging to it's Flat Creek, I believe, a very small water body that connects to the Willamette, and it's hard to meet those discharge effluent limitations. So again, we had this conversation a few years ago, and there was concern about capacity in the system. So we've worked with MWMC. They commissioned a study through Jacob Solutions, an engineering firm, to look at capacity at sort of a high level. And big picture found that the system has adequate capacity in most places across the system. The large components of the system, the clarifiers, the aeration tanks, the digesters, have sufficient capacity. There are some potential pipe limitations over in Springfield and connecting to Glenwood that need to be looked at. And so we'll need to go through more detailed engineering analysis on that. And if there are upgrades, it's the intent that the new users to the system would pay for those upgrades. It would impact the timeline for, future capital improvements for the MWMC system for those larger improvements. As we're adding more flow into the system, there's the potential that those would need to come sooner. So that's outlined to some degree in this high-level report, but we will need to do more work on this as we get into that part of it. And I just want to say, the point we're at right now, we've struggled with, how much detail to go into when it's really a policy decision that we're looking for now. We didn't want to take this to the, full engineering design, the high cost of doing all that, if there isn't policy support for moving in this direction. So it's kind of been a sort of chicken and the egg scenario where we try to figure out, how much effort do we put into the detailed analysis if we don't know if we have the support. So the other piece was around the cost. And we've done some cost estimating. Last was done in 2023 for the Lane County portion, the Goshen landfill part. So that looked at about a $20 million construction, and then some connection charges into that, bringing it to the 32 to 36 million range. Crestwell has done a similar study, and they have some ongoing operations maintenance costs built into theirs, so I didn't put them in the same table, but they're looking at the $60 to $63 million range for the project. And then just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we got a figure from Junction City. So the very expensive project. We don't yet know how the funding will come together from the different entities, and we're working with Regional Solutions. The governor's office is very interested in this regional approach and is trying to pull in potential agencies to help find, grant money, loan money to bring this project together. But we're still, at the beginning part of that funding conversation. But the big piece that I want you to take away, you may think, why do this, if there's a risk to City of Eugene ratepayers? And the intent is that there would be no financial impact to existing ratepayers, that the new users would pay their way into the system. So first, that would be done by, we've agreed to a methodology with MWMC that we would use their SDC, System Development Charge methodology. So that has a component that looks backwards to pay for capacity that's already in the system that would be used, as well as a forward-looking component for future capital improvements that would be needed so that the new flows will be paying their way. We will need to work through an agreement with the different parties to document, who would pay for which pieces and make sure that it's clear that the new users are paying their way. And we're starting some conversations with Crestwell around that, and we'll need to engage MWMC. We're also proposing ongoing 5% out-of-network charge for the new users coming into the system, knowing that the system will require a more pumped wear time and chemicals that are used in the treatment facility and things like that are harder to define. So with that additional 5% on ongoing rates, that will help cover to make sure existing ratepayers aren't negatively impacted. Some benefits to the system is that, for those future capital projects, by expanding the ratepayer base, that can make it more affordable for all ratepayers in the system. There's sort of an economy of the scale thing. And just looking regionally, there's a lot of benefit around cost savings and efficiency. Again, these wastewater treatment plants are very expensive and difficult to maintain, that not having to have multiple of these in the region running and relying on MWMC, which is, an award-winning facility that does such a great job doing this, that if we can all just rely on that one regional system and be able to expand that makes a lot of sense. We talked about the emissions reductions with the trucking, water quality improvements, with those small water bodies that these facilities are having to discharge to, trying to improve their economic vitality for the region. Again, the jobs in Goshen, but also in Crestwell and Junction City, and the ability to open up housing. Junction City has several hundred housing units that could be opened up if we can get through a solution for them on this wastewater issue. So that's a benefit to the region, and I think the City of Eugene to have jobs that are in these communities, or housing for people that have jobs in the City of Eugene, So there's some regional benefits here to consider. So again, where we're at here is to look at this policy decision around the Metro Plan. Currently, the Metro Plan doesn't allow extensions outside of the urban growth boundary. State law does allow for that into these areas, the landfill, Goshen, and another inside of a city UGB. So this Metro Plan amendment would allow for that additional extension into these service areas that are allowed by state law. That will require approval from each of the entities of the Metro Plan, Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County. There will also need to be an update to the intergovernmental agreement for the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. Again, those same three parties. So that would be after the Metro Plan amendment. And so that will get into more of the detail around the specifics of the areas and payment and different things like that. We will have to adopt regulations prohibiting cross connections. So that means that this won't allow for sprawl between Cresswell and Goshen. By state law, we would not allow, it could not be allowed to connect in other developments along the way. So it's just connecting between these areas and servicing them. We'll have to work through a lot of engineering, again, looking more into the capacity issues and refinement in the connection costs. We'll have to work through intergovernmental agreements for operations and maintenance, ownership. We have to work through all the financing pieces. So there's a lot yet to come on this, and there are points where the city will have additional decision-making authority, particularly with the MWMC intergovernmental agreement, which would need to go to all parties. So we went to the city of Springfield on January 5th, and they were generally supportive, wanting to have some more detail on a few issues, but generally supportive. And they were open to the idea of Junction City being added. But again, we need to go to our board on that. So that's the next step in February after our work session here today. And then we'll start working through the Planning Commission piece of that in April and May. For gearing up to the joint elected public hearing May, June, and your official deliberations and action June, July. So that's what we're shooting for, trying to get through this before the city of Springfield takes their summer recess. And I will stop there for your questions. Thank you. Councilor Zelenka?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to our partners at Lane County and the city for that presentation. Appreciate that coordination. I have Councilor Zelenka and then Councilor Keating and Councilor Kaczynski in the queue. Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, thank you. So many questions. The main one revolves around protecting the ratepayers for Eugene and Springfield. I mean, Eugene and Springfield paid for the MWC plant. They built it. They built the capacity, including any surplus that we can grow into. And so if we add Goshen, Cresswell, Junction City, and eat up the surplus or require building a new expansion, how do we ensure that Eugene Springfield ratepayers are held harmless? Is that what's the nature of that guarantee? Is it contractual? It also kind of looks like there's little to no benefit to Eugene Springfield by bringing these folks on, but a high risk of increased costs. So really who pays and how that actually plays out is critically important. And if they buy in at their existing capacity, how much, what about the growth? Who pays for those new costs as we come over time? And how big would this expansion be that would require to add in all of these? Those are some questions I had. If you could address them, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. And I might ask Matt Stouter from MWMC to jump in on pieces of this. But MWMC is going through an update to their system development charge methodology that will take those parts into consideration. And what has been the investment? What is the remaining capacity that new users should pay to join into the system? So it's using that methodology that looks at that. So, and then going forward, future improvements that need to be made. Part would be through that SDC, and then also part for the the rate paying. So the New Year's is in the system would be paying, their monthly fees that go into not only operating the system, but also for future improvements. And I want to say that, with this Metro Plan amendment, I would love to hear your feedback of ultimately what would you like to see the county bring through to this process. If you're not supportive at all, if you're supportive of just the initial concept, which was Goshen and the landfill, or if we're talking Crestwell and this recent addition to Junction City, if you're open to all of those, it would be good to hear feedback on that. But Matt, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Council. Matt Stouter, MWMC Executive Director. And correct. So the SDC methodology MWMC has is presently being updated. Our current methodology actually holds us back from collecting the full amount. The commission can decide, our board can decide with a new methodology if they want to collect up to and including the full amount of SDCs. But that said, I expect the buying cost to increase substantially over what was proposed in the 2023 dollars. What we did is we have a couple studies ongoing right now, but we had Jacobs Engineering, who formerly was CH2M Hill, take a look at our capacity from a 20-year perspective and see what's available and where do we have excess capacity that we're not going to use in that planning horizon. And generally, the report showed we have excess capacity at the plant with a couple of small exceptions, along with the pump station at Glenwood. And so the proposal, as I understand it, would be that this project would pay where there's excess capacity. That's where they would pay an SDC, not jeopardizing future capacity in the 20-year plan for Eugene and Springfield ratepayers. And then needed upgrades would be paid for by the project. And then there would be a 5% surcharge along with that. One thing that wasn't mentioned was just I feel is a regional benefit that supports Eugene and Springfield and actually shifts some of the risk that we currently are experiencing and that our ratepayers are experiencing is with respect to forever chemicals and PFAS, our solids program out at the biosolids management facility where we apply solids. We have cooperative agreements with ryegrass farmers. We've had some farmers who are concerned about the content of those solids. They're very high value solids. They have minor trace amounts of PFAS in them, as do all solids across the country. And we've seen some farmers leave the program. And so at risk of having to landfill some of those solids unless we can find additional farmers to cooperate, which we have done. However, Junction City and Crestwell both have between the two of them, several hundred acres of area that we could use for biosolids application, which would provide a stability for our ratepayers in the future. So I wanted to add that, and I'm happy to answer any other questions with respect to cost impacts.
So Matt, could you quantify the surplus capacity? What's the current million gallons of the existing plant, and what's the current amount of capacity that's surplus, and what's the amount that would come from Goshen, Crestwell, and Junction City? Probably don't know the exact estimate for Goshen, but we do know for Junction City and Crestwell. And so, I mean, a little disconcerting that they don't buy into our capacity, which we already paid for. So that impacts our ratepayers. That's a concern I'm trying to get at.
So the capacity question is challenging. We don't have an answer for Junction City yet because that study has not been done. It's being looked at, nor do we have an answer for the fact if all three of these entities were to come in at the same time. We've done an analysis for Goshen and Crestwell. That said, the Jacobs is working on looking at what the impacts would be from all three. The capacity question is difficult to answer because it's more than just flow. There's various loadings, and Michelle could speak to that on total suspended solids, BOD, metals, more than just flow. The flow component actually isn't a problem for us. It does manifest itself in the Glenwood pump station, but at the plant, the flow component is not a challenge. We see typically 25 to 30 million gallons a day on a dry weather basis, and we have wet weather capacity up to 277 MGD. The flows, I think, Dan, from Crestwell and Goshen, Crestwell is what, at build out 2.2 MGD?
I think that was correct.
And Goshen is on the order of 1-ish. So it's 1 to 2% of our wet weather flows, 5 to 6% of our dry weather flows. But again, the outside of the collection system, which is a separate issue with Springfield, haven't analyzed it for Junction City and the Eugene local system, but at the MWMC system, the flows themselves are fairly small, and in the 20-year horizon, we don't see any impacts. But then you get into, as I mentioned, some of the other issues with respect to solids and BOD and that sort of thing, and that it needs a little additional analysis.
Yeah. So you were asking Dan what we'd like to see. I'd like to, if this move forward, I want to ensure that Eugene and Springfield ratepayers, which have been footing the bill for MWMC for decades and decades, are protected and isolated. So there would be a separate accounting for the costs and the revenues associated with all of the capacity expansion and all of the other things associated with bringing on those three systems into the MWMC system, and have that so that isolates the Springfield and Eugene ratepayers, so that we're not cross-subsidizing that. And that's my main concern. If we don't have those kind of good accounting procedures and we don't have those kind of contractual guarantees, then how do we ensure that we don't end up subsidizing these other communities that are, in fact, we're bailing them out basically, so allowing them to come on. So that how do we do that? And can we do that, the separate accounting system? Is that the plan?
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that would be our intent, to be able to track, especially for the improvements that are needed in the near term, that those are all being paid for by the new users. I'll have to defer to Matt on the accounting parts of it, but we have worked, we've had a few sessions with MWMC to explain, what we're proposing and hear their feedback. And MWMC did give us a letter of support that they're supportive of the project, so that was good to see. But I think we can work through that accounting piece to make sure that is isolated from the rest of the system in some way. Matt, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can mention that at a high level, the commission, our board, is supportive, recognizing a lot of additional analysis needs to occur. One thing I can add under the current proposal is that basically the SDC model for buying in would be where there is excess capacity in the 20-year planning period. So above beyond what is already accounted for in a 20-year planning period, there's excess capacity. That's what the SDC would buy in. Where that capacity in the 20-year plan does not exist, the project and the users of Crestwell, Junction City, and Goshen would pay for needed upgrades that are coming early, thereby protecting our ratepayers, Eugene Springfield ratepayers. And then after 20 years, I think that's where there could be a contractual arrangement, or there could be discussion. But after 20 years of paying into the system, essentially you're under a new plan, a new facilities plan, a new planning period. And those users could either be looked at as part of the system, or they could still be looked at as separate. There's room for discussion there, but that's kind of how I saw it, or how I'm interpreting the proposal as it currently sits.
Councilor Zelenka, you're muted. You have just a couple of seconds left, but you were muted.
So I'm understanding that there's a difference between the SDC and the buy-in for personal capacity for SDC. So that's where the subsidy could come in. That's what worries me, if they're not the same type of methodology and price.
Councilor, Dan, I'm sorry, we ran over, so we'll have to loop around to come to the next questions. But we have several other councilors who also have questions, and we can loop back, Councilor Zelenka, if you need a second round. Councilor Kaczynski.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Matt. I feel like, assuming that the logistical details regarding how we ensure that Eugene ratepayers are not sort of footing the bill for this, I see a lot of advantages in regional cooperation and regional collaboration and not duplicating efforts. And so feel like am open to the request from Crestwell and Junction City and Short Mountain, assuming that all of these logistical details work out and all that maths correctly. I did have some questions about Goshen in particular. So I think my first question is actually for probably Eugene's staff. I know that we are working on getting funding to build out infrastructure to facilitate industrial development in Clear Lake, does that industrial infrastructure improvements that are needed for Clear Lake include wastewater infrastructure? So is that something that we're trying to get put in place so that we can build in Clear Lake?
Yes, that is part of the funding.
Okay. So we're currently trying to expand wastewater so that we can.
Right, our local system, right.
Okay. When I was reading the exception documents for the Goal 14 exception for Goshen, a lot of that was predicated on the fact that Eugene did not have enough industrial land within its UGB. But that exception was requested before we brought the Clear Lake area for industrial into the UGB. And so was wondering if any of this analysis regarding industrial development in Goshen had been updated based on the changing conditions of the land in Eugene inside the UGB designated for industrial.
That's a good question, Councilor Kucinich. No, we have not done an update with analysis on that basis.
Okay, so it's really up in the air as to whether or not we would be putting ourselves in a position where we are competing with Goshen for industrial development.
I suppose there's that possibility where you know, a business is coming in and they would be looking at either area, and if you look at that as competition, I can't really speak to that. We haven't done more analysis.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just really quickly, it's been a few years, but there is a regional economic development plan that the City Council participated in with other jurisdictions, and includes a bullet about supporting regional economic development, including industrial lands in Goshen, and we can provide you with that information as well. But it is something that at least a previous council had talked about supporting in the past, is enhancing that industrial land.
Okay. Yeah, because I always look a little bit at enhancing industrial outside of UGBs and expanding infrastructure. Like there's a reason why you have to get an exception to do it. And the fact that the exception was granted under different conditions gives me pause. So thank you.
We'll look more into that. Thank you.
Councillor Ye.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So some of the things I was going to say are excellent. ED Matt has already done for me, so thank you very much for that. You know, we've been talking, I know this might feel somewhat new here at this table, but we've been talking about this for quite a while at the MWMC, and I think the letter that is in our packet is an excellent, it's an excellent letter, and it very clearly expresses the opinion at the table at MWMC that after spending a lot of time on this, we are in general support. I am as well. I think, you know, we could look at it as bailing them out, but I think we could also look at it as we each have assets to bring to the table. And, you know, we are bringing a lot to the table because we have the plant, but these communities also have assets that they can share and to our resilience and our base to be able to support this very important utility. So there are definitely benefits on both sides. But Dan, the one thing I wanted to bring up in the letter from the MWMC, one of the things that we have suggested is around having some type of regional project manager, because there are a lot of questions to still answer, and that I'm wondering if you've had time. I'm sure you've read the letter, so I'm wondering if you've had time to think about that and what your thoughts are.
Yes, Councilor, I completely agree. This project keeps growing and growing, and it's taking more capacity than I have before, but it really needs somebody dedicated to take it through the rest of the way. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with some of those next step things I showed. I did meet with our county administrator and our policy director just last week to talk about that, and they committed to funding a position, half of an FTE, and wanted us to approach the city of Cresswell and the city of Junction City to see if they would fund a quarter of it. So we haven't had those conversations yet. We have a conversation coming up with Cresswell in the next couple of weeks, and then we need to reach out to Junction City to see if that would be a potential way to fund a full FTE for ushering this project through. But completely agree that we need to have an identified project manager that has the capacity.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it's already in the works and we're already making progress. That's fantastic. So just from my own, as a city councilor, my own position, I am generally in favor of these projects. The Junction City one we haven't had much time to sit with, but Goshen, going out to Short Mountain, and Cresswell all make a lot of sense with the information we have today. And if we can use that new position to answer all these other questions that we have, I think we can get to a place where we can make a really informed decision. So I am very much in favor of moving this forward and getting the answers to those questions so we can make that final decision.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, everyone. I want to say that I am generally in favor of a regional approach to this. So moving forward seems like a good idea, but I have a lot of concerns, of concerns that are very similar to my colleagues, especially Alan's. One of the pieces for me is I wish I had better information about future opportunity cost for the people of Eugene. In other words, there's going to be different phasing about how different communities all within the system grow. We have, for example, in the city of Eugene, an obligation to the state to build 1,600 new housing units a year for the next 20 years. And I don't have as clear an understanding as I would like to have about the future demand on our current excess capacity. So how much of our current excess capacity are we going to use up in these connections that may or may not hinder our requirement to grow at a different pace than we are, and or the other communities in the areas? I don't know enough about, for example, the housing demand over the next 20 years that is placed on other communities, these others that we've mentioned, and then certainly Springfield. We have to produce 1,600 units a year or start changing things according to the state. So what's the Springfield demand and so forth? How does it affect the system's future growth and need for expansion of capacity? And how, as Alan put it, do we keep an inordinate amount of that cost from falling on the people of Eugene? So I really would appreciate greater understanding of how this phases into the future, considering those growth demands over time. Can either of you, Matt or Dan, address that short term, long term?
I can take a stab at it. I don't know if I can quantify the excess capacity. So we have, in the 20-year facilities plan that Jacobs looked at, they looked at how is Eugene and Springfield, how are they anticipated to grow if they were to do the max build out in 20 years based on the current land use? What would that do?
Forgive me, that's our capacity to grow or our demand to grow from the state? I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's based on, they looked at the planning horizon, 20-year planning horizon based on the current land use and the projections of growth. So if we were to build out everything at the current land use, if different pieces of land are rezoned to something different, it didn't contemplate that, but it looked at the present land use, a build out scenario in 20 years. What would the capacity? What are the capacity needs? And then everything above that was excess. And so, in essence, I guess what I'm trying to say is Eugene and Springfield ratepayers are going to come into the system and they're going to pay for the needed upgrades, regardless of whether Crestwell and Goshen come in or not. If Crestwell and Goshen come in, anything that they provide to us would be additional revenue that we could use. And where that's not the case, where there's a capacity, where there is an existing capacity issue, the proposal would be that they pay that up front, or in some manner there's a contractual arrangement where they take that obligation on and offload it from the existing ratepayers so that they are not impacted. Dan, do you understand it that way?
Yes, that's what we're proposing. Yes, thanks, Matt.
So the excess capacity that we're talking about in the 20-year planning horizon is available for sale or not. But if it goes unused, then it's available 40 years down the road, 30 years down the road. Typically when you do a planning level projection, you look at a 20-year period and the build out associated with that.
But it's based on our, forgive me, it's based on our current capacity based on our land use analysis of land today, not based on the demand that we expect to put on it if we suddenly need to increase the number of, say, housing units or residential housing units that are constructed each year.
I might look to planning for a little bit of help on that, but it's based on the current present land use and build out scenario. If the state comes in and makes new demands that are not known at this time, that's not accounted for, but it's based on best information.
I'll just jump in and add, I did take a look at one of these reports, and the part that I did understand is that it's based on population. So it's the number that we get from the state that we're anticipated to grow. So it's kind of regardless of where that happens, it's really based on household numbers and estimated jobs based on our projected population growth.
Thank you. That helps a little. More detail would be good. Thank you.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to start by saying that I share a great many concerns brought up by colleagues in regards to Eugene ratepayers carrying the load for communities outside of our UGB. But I'm also interested in LCC. Would this bring LCC into the fold as well? And if so, would that provide an incentive for Lane Community College to allow for student housing in the future if they're brought under this larger plan? And then I have a follow-up.
Councilor, this proposal is not looking at including Lane Community College as an addition. And it's my understanding that that's primarily because there are additional land use issues that would need to be resolved that aren't just outright allowed in state law without obtaining an exception. So we do have some of our land use folks on the line that might be able to speak to this in more detail, but the current proposal is that LCC would not be included.
I appreciate it. On the land use point, brushing up on this subject, I was reading an article from the Eugene Weekly in 2014 that indicated that 1,000 Friends and Landwatch had some significant concerns expressed 12 years ago. And I wanted to know, and those concerns revolved around wetlands, a data point that cited that the Goshen area may be up to 80% wetlands. What has Metropolitan Wastewater done to mitigate or to address those concerns over the last decade plus?
So MWMC hasn't done anything around that piece of it. Around the issues that were brought up during the appeal, those were all addressed with LUBA, and there was the remand to look at. There were a number of issues besides the wastewater service piece, and it was resolved through that process to ultimately get that Goal 14 exception. we haven't done additional analysis into the development of Goshen since that time. Really, this project kind of went on the back burner for a number of years after that. It's really the urgency of Cresswell that's kind of brought this up to the forefront again. But we haven't done additional studies of the Goshen area.
All right, I appreciate it. A robust environmental impact study would be my request. So in addition to the economic concerns, have great environmental.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Zelenka and then Councilor Clark.
Yeah, my next question was similar to what Mike was talking about with the same kind of concern. So we have a certain amount of surplus capacity right now that we paid for and built, and it will, and we can absorb that through our growth. And but if we take that surplus capacity and allocate it to Cresswell or Junction City or Goshen, and they only pay the SDC amount and not the buy-in costs, that could create a problem if the SDC costs that they would pay are lower than or not as much as the buy-in costs. So are the SDC costs lower or the same or more than the buy-in cost per million gallons, say?
Great question, Councilor, and I think we'll probably have to go into more detail with that through the SDC methodology, but just a quick answer. I was confused when that initial financial study brought these two methods of a buy-in versus the SDC methodology. And what I've learned since then is that the SDC methodology has a buy-in component to it. In my presentation, I told about those two components. There's the reverse-looking one where it's looking at the capacity that's being used, and then there's a forward-looking component that's looking at additional capacity that would be needed in the future. So the buy-in is sort of built into the SDC methodology, and as MWMC updates that methodology over the next few months, I think we'll probably have more detail around what is the ratio between those components and what those look like at a per unit per user basis. Maybe Matt wants to speak more to that.
I think that's a good summary, Dan. I don't have anything more to add.
So you don't know if the SDC cost per million gallons is the same as the buy-in cost per million gallons. That was a sticking point before, and the SDC cost was not equal to the buy-in cost, and that was a problem.
Right.
So it ended up being a subsidy because we're giving away our surplus and then having to build it more later.
Right. They were pretty close, but there was a difference in them. Councilor, good memory there. I anticipate as we go through this SDC methodology update that there's going to be a significant increase to that SDC cost that's going to be higher than what was estimated in the buy-in component originally. So I think as we get through that study update, which I think is anticipated to complete maybe late spring, we'll be able to make more of a comparison there to that previous methodology if you'd like to look at that.
Yeah, as well, when Coburg wanted to connect to our system, they did that analysis too, and they ended up building their own waste treatment plant because it was cheaper to build the waste treatment plant than do the buy-in costs. And so if you could compare it to that calculation that we did back then, so again, the whole thing is don't cross subsidize between Eugene and Springfield to bring on board Junction City and Cresswell. And Jennifer, while I agree there's a modest amount of benefit that we get from a bigger expanded system in terms of resiliency or anything, but if possible, can you quantify those benefits compared to the risks associated with it? Because I think it's probably 99-1 in terms of cost, risk versus benefit that we get, but I'm not sure unless you do that kind of analysis.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback, Councilor, and for all the feedback of the other councilors. We will definitely, take all these issues and concerns and work on providing some more detail around these as we move through the Metro Plan Amendment process, so that we can have more refined answers.
Thanks.
I have Councillor Clark, and then we will move to our second agenda item. Councillor Clark.
Just wanted to say real quickly and plant a seed in people's head to think about later. It was my point of view that we made a mistake 10 years ago in adding 0 new land for residential homes to the UGB when we had the opportunity and established our UGB. I clearly think that was a mistake. I think one of the things it did was force an increased rate of growth in the outside communities, and we have to then consider the consequence of that. I would just say that there's a day coming not too far in the distant future where we have to look at the potential for impact to our UGB for residential growth of the future. And it's important to remember these kind of conversations when we get there. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, again for that presentation. Thank you to our partners for that presentation today. And that concludes our first agenda item. I'll now turn to City Manager Pro Tem Rodriguez to introduce our second topic, which is a work session on the 1059 Willamette redevelopment.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this right over to Amanda D'Souza from Community Development.
Thanks, Matt. I will get my screen shared. Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Councilors. I'm Amanda D'Souza, Development Programs Manager in the Community Development Division. Today, I'm here to provide you with an update on the 1059 Willamette redevelopment project. You're being asked to consider today extending the February 1st closing date, which is when we would transfer the property to the team and they would begin construction. As you'll hear, the team is facing financial challenges and they're working to prepare a request for additional urban renewal funds. The request today is to allow the team more time to refine their project financials and bring a specific request to the agency board for consideration. It's been a while since you've had a work session on the project, and both the mayor and Councilor Kaczynski have joined since then. So I'll do a quick recap of the project and its key milestones. We're working with the team jointly led by DeChase Mixis and Edlin and Company. Both of these are experienced developers with a variety of market rate and affordable housing projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. The projects they're leading and which you've approved includes 133 units. 68 of those would be income qualified to 80% of area median income, and 65 would be market rate. Those income qualified units would remain affordable for 35 years, which is longer than the minimum of 20 years that we required. The project would offer resident services from Cornerstone Community Housing. 10 units will be designated for Hope and Safety Alliance. There's an active ground floor with incubator retail space and local art. There's pet amenities. And council authorized the use of $1.84 million for SDCs, permits, and other project-related costs. Next, I'll walk through some of the key milestones for this project. The building has been vacant since 2013 when Lane Community College moved to their new downtown campus. In 2019, we began exploring the possibility of using the site to pilot a mixed income housing project, and that year LCC approved sale of the property to the city. We acquired the property in 2020 using federal community development block grant dollars, and a few months later, council approved the use of a request for proposals process for disposition of the site. The RFP outlined several criteria for the project and identified the availability of $1.1 million for SGCs and permits. That $1.1 million is a combination of downtown urban renewal funds and the MUFG moderate income housing fee collected from Gordon Lofts. The RFP was released at the end of 2020, and we received one response, which you selected in June 2021. Later in 2021, you approved deal points for the proposed project. And in May 2023, you approved revisions to those deal points. In June 2023, council amended the downtown urban renewal plan, increasing the spending limit by $50 million, emphasizing the intention to use the majority of those funds to support new housing in the downtown core. And finally, in February 2024, you approved the MUFD for the project and revised deal points. And on the same day, the agency board approved an additional $740,000 of urban renewal funds for project-related costs to help offset increases in construction costs and interest rates. Since then, the development team has worked to make progress on the project and prepare for construction. They've worked to refine and finalize their design, and in 2025, they applied for and received approval for all permits needed to construct the building. The city's updated environmental review, a federal requirement, was approved in December 2024, as was the traffic control plan, which will be used to mitigate the impacts that construction will have on 11th Avenue, Willamette Street, and the adjacent downtown transit station. All in all, the team has already invested about $1.6 million to get the project to where it is today, but the financial market continues to be a roadblock. With two experienced teams at the helm, you're probably wondering why it's stuck where it is. There's so many pieces that need to come together in the right way for a real estate project to pencil. We could probably be here the rest of the day digging into those details of the project, but for the sake of brevity, I'll provide a snapshot of the key challenges. The total project cost is just under $33 million. The City and Urban Renewal Agency have allocated $1.84 million towards that and is offering the land at no cost. On the private funding side, the development team has been able to secure the debt needed to have an even split for the project. However, they've struggled to attract the equity investment needed. I'll highlight some of the key headwinds that the project is facing. First, continued volatility in financial markets impacts nearly every piece of the real estate puzzle, from high interest rates to construction costs to investors' appetites for risk. Second, the income qualified units limit the operating income, which ultimately impact the debt and equity the project can attract. And third, the main pinch point right now is that they can't secure equity investment because their expected rate of return is below market, meaning it's not competitive to attract investors. Without an option to significantly increase rents or decrease construction costs, the development team would like to make a proposal for additional urban renewal funds to offset project costs and bring the rate of return for project equity in line with market realities. The takeaway from today's presentation is that if council wishes to continue to pursue the development originally envisioned for the site, the selected development team will need additional time and additional financing. Currently, the team is working on refining their proposal, including working to get updated construction costs, updated term sheets with the lender and the lead investor. And right now, they estimate the funding gap is within the range of $1 to $3 million. However, the investment of any additional public funds in this project is likely to trigger the prevailing wage laws, which they estimate could increase the gap by an additional $5 to $7 million. We're here today because right now the development agreement requires the city and the team to close by February 1st. Today, council is asked to approve an extension of the closing deadline by 6 months. This would allow time for the team to finish updating their financial package and refine their proposal, which staff anticipate bringing to the agency board for consideration in the spring. If council chooses not to extend the deadline today, the development agreement would expire and we would come back to you to discuss where to go from there. There are a few paths forward, but because we use federal CDBG dollars to acquire the site, we must implement a project with at least half the units affordable to 80% AMI. It's likely any developer will face similar headwinds if pursuing a mixed income project, and pivoting to an all affordable housing project would join a very highly competitive queue for state funding. With that, we'll hand it back to the mayor for discussion and are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate that presentation. It's an exciting and challenging project and a new ground for our community to accomplish mixed income housing with a majority workforce housing units. I'll now open the floor to council discussion and see Councilor Zelenka in the queue.
Yeah, I agree. This is exactly the type of project we need with the affordable housing component and the 35 years and the 10 units for women's space, pet friendly, cornerstone services. All those are great. And I understand these are not easy projects to develop. They're difficult. it may. So we've been working on this for over 5 years, and it still hasn't come to fruition. And the developers have been working on it since deal points are October 2021. So we're 4 years into that, and we're still not at the point where it's a doable project. And it looks like they're not only asking for an extension, but they're asking for a substantial amount more money to fill the gap if they can't fill it. I guess the question I'm struggling with is it time to move on, or are these projects doable, or they're just not doable the way we envision them, or is, or do we just keep throwing more money into this bucket to make it happen, which I might be in favor of, but it seems like we just keep going around this treadmill, and it keeps coming back to us with a bigger ask, and wonder how much longer we can do that.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a question for council to consider. I mean, we've always thought of this as a pilot project that, if successful, we would love to see in other places. I think we're seeing, I mean, it's been a very strange 6 years. And I don't think any of us saw these past 6 years occurring when we launched this project. But it's just a changing market. And so we're just trying to be reactive to that. We need all the housing we can get. We're trying to creatively use the tools we have. And in this case, it was CDBG and urban renewal. And so, I mean, the team is optimistic that an additional ask will help, is what they need to get that equity investment into the project, and for them to go, they're ready to break ground as soon as they can lock in all the money. But I think, yeah, the question you pose is one for even the councilors to ponder.
Yeah, well, if we had done a full percentage point on the construction tax, we'd have $1 million that we could contribute to this, but we didn't do that. And one of the things we learned a while back was that affordable housing projects are exempt from prevailing wage laws, which is understandable but troubling at the same time. And it really adds another $4 million to the cost of the project.
Yeah, the estimate is that it adds about 20% to the construction cost of the labor cost.
Yeah, that kind of brings up what's the labor rates they're paying for the affordable housing project if we're adding $4 million to construction, which is going to take about a year and a half. Do we know the difference between what their labor rates are and what the prevailing wage rates are at this point?
Not right now. We can.
If you could find that out, that'd be good. Yeah. Maybe Denny knows.
Thank you, Councilor Zinka. Denny Bro, Planning Development. We have recent experience. We have recent experience with this because the two riverfront housing projects paid prevailing wage. The Heartwood, we worked closely with Atkins and Dame and their contractors to kind of pull out the extra costs that were attributed to prevailing wage for that project. It's not an exact science, but their contractors estimated it was about a $7 million impact for the Heartwood project and about $10 million in additional costs for Heartwood. So if you translate that to this project, that number is probably in the ballpark.
You know the hourly wage difference?
They changed, and it varies a lot by trade. They've gone up 40%. They've gone up 40% at least since the Heartwood was built. Thanks. So there's been an escalation in addition to the higher prevailing wage, there's been a pretty significant escalation that have occurred across the trades, and the wage rates are different from trade to trade.
Yeah, well, so if I've got this right, they're asking for an extension and they're going to come back with an ask for more money. So it's
correct.
Twofer. Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you. I think that despite his editorial comment, Councilor Zelenka brings up a good point, which is, to summarize, how do we, from a policy perspective, evaluate what's a good investment for us to continue with versus time to, fish or cut bait? I would propose that staff develop for us we're trapped in this system. We're trapped in the system of intentionally constraining land use and having to publicly subsidize low-income housing. And that's a reality. Those are the twin points of the problem. I'm not in favor of this system, frankly, but it's the one we're in. So we should probably be working on some method to say X number of dollars is too much per subsidized unit that it gets built publicly, locally. In other words, we're willing to invest X number of dollars of public funds to produce low-income housing. And at X plus $1, we say, no, it's no longer worth it. We need a better method for evaluating the value in that way. And I would turn towards staff and ask for some guidance with regard to how to evaluate that. If you've got any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
I can jump in. Will Dowdy, Community Development Director. I think that we can bring back a little bit more of that sort of information when, as Amanda noted, this is kind of a two-part. Right now, we're up against the timeline for this deal to move forward, and so the simpler half of this request is to extend that deadline so that we have time to bring back a proposal. So I think at the time when we bring back a proposal, we can have some more to react to. I think looking at longer term, the evaluation, there's a lot of different ways to look at that. And I think that's been one of the challenges that makes it a little bit hard to do that. I think what we haven't really done is looked at the way that city services intertwine with downtown development, and the fact that working on existing utilities currently served land provides a long-term value to the community that we don't get in other parts of the community. But all that being said, I think there's the kind of the promise of urban renewal, the genius of urban renewal, the way we use it is that it creates an internal feedback loop, so that the investments that you make in every urban renewal project in some way contribute to the creation of more tax increment, which then becomes an opportunity for further investment, which becomes an opportunity for further feedback. And so I think
only if we're doing that with private land, though, correct?
It's both. I think some investments are better suited or have a stronger tax impact than others. But what we've seen overall in the district is the opportunity for each investment to have some sort of feedback. And so this project, whether however it moves forward, however council wants to move it forward, we've had community members note this property as a problem and as a barrier to their investment in their property. And so I think that there's a neighborhood impact that a redevelopment project like this has that goes beyond the simple tax return that comes from it. That being said, what we can do is we can look at some of our projected tax numbers from this and come up with a way to describe this project in terms of real impact going forward. So I think we can do a little bit of all of that. I just want to paint that bigger picture that I think is really important and is something that you considered when you're looking at the urban renewal district plans.
We don't get to just consider this project in isolation of our downtown. We got to think of the broader picture, and I agree with you on that. I wonder, is there a way to calculate the cost to the city of the additional 6 months? I mean, it seems like, what's the cost to say, okay, fine, we'll extend?
I mean, I would say the cost is minimal. I mean, we'll continue working with the team to prepare for bringing you the proposal, but the team will be preparing the proposal for us to bring to you. So essentially 6 months essentially makes no difference. We continue to maintain the building, which has minimal costs.
Do we anticipate any massive change to the important factors, the deal points, in the next 6 months?
Nope. Other than the funding, nope.
Well, I'm in favor of us giving them more time to work, but I don't know, because it doesn't seem to cost us to do it. So I'd be in favor of that, but I really would like a better metric for how do we evaluate the value of any individual subsidized project and what it's likely to cost on a per unit basis. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, if I might just jump in, Mayor, the other thing 6 months does is it does let us get past the short session to see if anything comes out of that that could be helpful in moving this project forward. And there has been a substantial investment by the developer in getting to this point. And I think continuing to work with them to try and get it over the line, if council wants to support that, this is our best shot because they are invested in this project.
Councillor Ye.
Thanks, Mayor. Amanda, I think I remember you reminding us that because of the way we purchased this land, it puts limitations on the type of project that can be built there. Is that correct? Can you go over that one more time really quick?
Yep. So we purchased the land using the Federal Community Development Block Grant Fund. So it's we call our land banking program. And the strings tied to that are at least 51% of the units of the housing project that happens on site needs to be affordable to at least 80% area median income.
Okay. So if we were to walk away from this particular plan, we'd just be walking into we'd have to create a similar situation with somebody else. Okay. Yeah. That was my understanding, and I just wanted to make sure I was accurate. I really appreciate these developers hanging in there and working through some difficult times to try to make this project viable. So I do not have a problem giving them 6 more months. It would be very challenging to have to redo this to find a new developer. I think having this building remain abandoned in its location is not doing our downtown any favors. So if we need to consider some additional support to make it viable, I'm willing to consider it. I do think that the other councilors bring up some good points about that. There's definitely going to be an upper limit to that. But I don't think that we should shy away from having that conversation into looking at how we can make this work in our downtown, because it could be a real positive benefit down there to have these additional residents, and also to have a problematic area that is, it doesn't have eyes on the street, right? Because it's just empty. To have that filled and have activity and things happening. So yeah, I'm in favor of giving them the 6 months, and we can come back to the table and see what they bring us.
Councillor Kaczynski.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the update on the project and for all the work that everyone, both on staff and on the development team, have been doing surrounding this. It sounds a little bit like one of the challenges we're running into that goes beyond just the challenges that everyone's having with building housing these days, is because it is a combination of market rate units and income limited units. It's kind of getting the worst of both worlds from challenges of getting the funding together. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, most affordable housing tools that exist are for housing that's 60% AMI or lower. And so they can't tap into those. And then the limited income from having the income qualified units makes it harder to get the debt and the equity. So they're in a unique position, and they have a unique problem that other projects might not have.
Okay. I am open to looking at what comes out of the 6 more months, and giving that opportunity to get some more information, and to get a different proposal. But I do think at that point, I feel like I would need some sort of more guarantee that the rest of the funding is going to actually come through, because if we're not able to get funding for this project as it's conceived, it might be time to start thinking of a different way to approach this project. Because I don't want to do another 6 months and another 6 months while we're waiting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, I'm also willing to go another 6 months. these are very difficult projects, but they're exactly the type of projects we need. There's no such thing as an unsubsidized affordable housing projects. So that's fact of life, as Mike was pointing out. And I agree with everything that Councilor Ye was talking about. What's the capacity of the urban renewal district to add additional capital into this project? Could we go all the way up to the prevailing wage additional costs?
Yep. So when you amended the plan in 2023, you increased the spending limit by $50 million. To date, we've spent about 3.1 million, and we've committed about another 6.9 million. So there is still room to allocate additional dollars.
So like 40 million in capacity.
Yeah.
So we do have that availability. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. In a moment, I'm going to turn to Council Vice President Leach to put forward a motion for discussion, but just first want to add myself to the queue and appreciate the work that staff has been doing with the development team looking at this project. Amanda, I especially appreciated you noting that 2020 to 2026 has included quite a lot of headwinds in the realm of construction and certainly with costs, and that not getting any better in this past calendar year. We've seen no new tailwinds with the work of housing production, which is really challenging. But I also want to reiterate what Councillor Zelenka said, which is that it is challenging to deliver new projects in locations in the center of a city that also are the sites that have the best chance to offer transformative positive energy in our city center, to offer people the opportunity to take advantage of incredible access to frequent transit right across the street and downtown amenities and businesses. And that when I think about the collective energy and attention that this council and previous councils have given to the revitalization of downtown, projects like this one is the work that has not previously happened. And I do think that that's very important to keep in mind, that the addition of new concentrations of mixed income housing in our city center in long-term assets that add a diversity of housing unit type, but at a diversity of income and household sizes, that these are really important contributions to those larger goals. And I very much appreciate the conversation today and the noted points about support for giving this additional time and then considering the opportunities that come back. With that, I will turn to Council Vice President Leach to put a motion forward.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the revised terms in Attachment A and to authorize the city manager to amend the development agreement consistent with the revised terms included in Attachment A to extend the closing date to August 3rd, 2026.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion from council? Then seeing none, I'll now take a vote for this motion. Please raise your hand, or that's small, but all in favor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Councilors, did I count you correctly? 6 in favor. And any opposed? 0. And the motion passes with a vote of 6-0. Thank you, staff, for that presentation, all the presentations today. Thank you again to our partners who are here. This does conclude our agenda for this afternoon. So thank you, City Council, and we are adjourned.